In the quiet Oak Ridge neighborhood, where neatly trimmed lawns stretched across quarter-acre lots, and the sound of wind chimes once signaled a peaceful day, a shocking abuse of power unfolded at the worst possible moment. It was during Amber Lewis's funeral, a modest backyard service under a white canopy, surrounded by flickering candles, and a framed photo of a woman who'd loved fiercely until her last breath at 37. Her son, Caleb, just 8 years old, clung to her polished wooden coffin, his small hands gripping the edge as he whispered, "I don't want her to go." His tears weren't loud. They were the deep, silent kind that only a child who'd lost his mother could cry. For those of us over 50, who've stood at too many gravesides ourselves, it was a sacred scene. Raw, human, untouchable. But not to Carol Mills, the president of the Oak Ridge Homeowners Association. Standing beneath a birch tree, her arms crossed and her lips curled in distaste, she saw Caleb's grief as a violation. Barely 20 minutes into the service, she stepped behind a hedge, dialed the police, and reported a noise disturbance, a little boy's sobs disrupting her version of peace. "It's quite emotional," she said into her pearl-pink phone case, "and it's affecting the neighbors." Two police cruisers rolled up 15 minutes later, their tires crunching on the gravel driveway, officers stepping out to document a disorderly gathering. John Lewis, Amber's widower, stood dumbfounded as they handed him a case number for his son's goodbye. But Carol didn't stop there. Days later, a $500 fine slipped under John's door, citing public disturbance and emotional distress during the funeral, a cold official slap on top of his heartbreak. Then came a formal letter on HOA letterhead, signed by Carol herself, threatening legal escalation for non-approved gatherings. This wasn't random cruelty, it was calculated. 6 months earlier, Amber had dared to question Carol at an HOA meeting. Why were dues climbing past $300 a year with no new streetlights or park benches? Carol hadn't forgiven her. Now, with Amber gone, she turned her authority into a weapon against a grieving family, hiding behind bylaws and a title. It was the kind of overreach that turns a neighborhood into a prison. And for John, it was just the beginning. John Lewis, known to his friends as JN, stood in his backyard on that gray morning, a man hollowed out by loss. His wife, Amber, was gone at 37, taken by illness after a life as a teacher, a mother, a neighbor who'd filled their home at 214 Brookside Lane with warmth. At her funeral, under a simple canopy strung with photos and candles, John's world shrank to his 8-year-old son, Caleb, sobbing over her coffin. For those of us over 50, we know that kind of grief. It's a weight that sits in your chest like a 50-pound stone, too heavy to lift alone. But when the police showed up, called by Carol Mills of the Oak Ridge HOA to report Caleb's tears as a disturbance, something shifted in John. Then came the $500 fine, slipped under his door like a bill for mourning, followed by a letter threatening legal escalation. At first he tore it up, hands shaking with a fury he hadn't known he could feel. But as the days passed, the silence in his house grew eerie. Caleb stopped laughing, stopped asking questions, just curled up with a photo album on the couch. John couldn't sleep. He'd sit at the dining table at 2 a.m., coffee cold, staring at a growing pile of HOA papers. He hadn't planned to fight, not yet. He just wanted answers. Why them? Why now? So he dug, pulled meeting minutes from the HOA website, budgets showing thousands of dollars vanish into emergency maintenance with no receipts, lists of fines hitting renters and single moms hardest. It was like unraveling a sweater with a single loose thread, and suddenly it hit him. This wasn't about his family alone. It was a system, cold, deliberate, built to squeeze folks who couldn't push back. Carol wasn't just a busybody. She was the architect of a quiet tyranny. John looked at Caleb, at the empty spaces Amber used to fill and felt the ache in his chest harden into resolve. He wasn't a lawyer or a hero, just a dad with a 10-year-old pickup and a broken heart. But he'd found the rot, and now, with every fiber of his being, he was ready to cut it out, not just for Caleb, but for everyone it had crushed. In Oak Ridge, a neighborhood where front yards spanned a quarter acre and porches once hummed with neighborly chatter, a quiet oppression had taken root under the HOA's iron grip. John Lewis, still reeling from his wife Amber's death and the HOA's $500 fine for his son, Caleb's tears at her funeral, wasn't alone in his suffering. Carol Mills and her board had turned rules into weapons, and the scars were everywhere. John found an ally in Tom Spencer, a sharp-eyed lawyer in his 30s who'd made a name taking on crooked HOAs in towns where folks lived on less than 10 miles of winding roads. Together they knocked on doors, their footsteps crunching over gravel driveways, hoping to break the silence. At first, no one answered. Fear had trained Oak Ridge to keep its head down. Fines for leaving a bike on the lawn overnight or hosting a baby shower had taught folks to pay up or shut up. But when John shared his story, how Carol called the cops on Caleb for grieving, something cracked. Mrs. Harper, a retired teacher in her 70s, with a voice like a school bell, stepped forward first. She'd been fined 3 times, $75 each, for hanging wind chimes on her porch, a sound that reminded her of her late husband. Then, Melissa Rivera, a single mom juggling 2 kids, showed letters demanding $250 for child-related debris after her 6-year-old forgot his tricycle outside. A black couple fined for excessive foot traffic after a baby shower joined in, followed by a Vietnam vet cited for garage clutter because he carved birdhouses in his 20 by 20 foot space. One by one, they brought photos, emails, threats, proof of a pattern. For us over 50, it's a scene that stirs memories of when neighborhoods meant block parties and helping hands, not petty tyrants. Tom turned their stories into a class action lawsuit, a chorus of the unheard rising against a board that fined joy itself. John's fight became theirs, a shared stand against a system that punished the vulnerable. Renters, widows, veterans, for living. They weren't just neighbors anymore. They were witnesses, their voices weaving a net that would soon trap Carol and her cronies. In Oak Ridge, solidarity wasn't just a word. It was the spark that turned victims into a force, proving that together, even the silenced could roar. In the shadow of Amber Lewis's death, her husband John turned his grief into a sledgehammer, smashing through the Oak Ridge HOA's facade of petty rules to reveal a rotting core. What started with a $500 fine for his son Caleb's tears at her funeral, called in by Carol Mills as a disturbance, ballooned into a legal reckoning that shook the neighborhood's half-mile streets. With lawyer Tom Spencer by his side, a man who'd toppled crooked HOAs in towns where the courthouse was a 10-minute drive, John built a case that grew beyond a family feud. Their class action lawsuit, fueled by neighbors' tales of fines for wind chimes and baby showers, caught the district attorney's eye. Subpoenas flew like autumn leaves, and investigators dug into HOA bank accounts, uncovering thousands of dollars siphoned off. $10,000 here for Carol's new deck, $5,000 there for first-class flights masked as conference travel. Emails surfaced too, threats over bike toys and paint colors, signed by board members who'd never been elected fair and square. For us over 50, it's the kind of courtroom saga we've watched on TV, but this was real. 6 board members, Carol included, facing a judge in a wood-paneled room. The trial lasted 10 days, each one peeling back layers of fraud, misconduct, and harassment. Caleb's words on day 7, "She was my mom, and I just wanted to say goodbye," silenced the room, a boy's truth cutting deeper than any lawyer's argument. The jury took less than 4 hours. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Carroll got 18 months in jail, a $20,000 fine hung over 2 others, and the rest were banned for life from any HOA gig. The Oak Ridge HOA dissolved by court order, its $200,000 in dues frozen, a new administrator stepping in to tear it all down, not just patch the cracks, but rebuild from scratch. Over weeks, folks met in backyards and school gyms, rewriting rules under open skies. No more $250 penalties for a kid's tricycle. No more secret votes. Transparency wasn't a buzzword. It was a promise. Streets warmed with laughter again, porches bloomed with chairs, and garden gnomes popped up like tiny flags of freedom. John's fight didn't just jail Carroll, it handed Oak Ridge back to its people, proving that justice, when it lands, can plant seeds for something new. Caleb Lewis was just 8 when his world shattered, his small hands clutching his mother Amber's coffin, as he whispered goodbye under a backyard canopy strung with candles and memories. At 37, Amber had been the heartbeat of their home on Brookside Lane, a teacher whose laugh once bounced off the quarter-acre yard. But when Carroll Mills and the Oak Ridge HOA turned that sacred moment into a $500 fine, calling the cops on a boy's tears, Caleb's grief deepened. He grew quiet, curling up on the couch with a photo album, flinching at every knock, asking if the police were back. For us over 50, who've watched grandkids wrestle with loss, it's a sight that cuts deep, a child too young to carry such weight. Yet, through his father John's fight, Caleb found a path to healing. John took on the HOA's corruption, uncovering thousands in stolen dues and fines for wind chimes, turning his pain into a courtroom victory that jailed Carroll for 18 months and dissolved the tyranny. Caleb, now 10, stepped into that courtroom too, his voice soft but steady. "She was my mom, and I just wanted to say goodbye." It wasn't just testimony, it was a spark, melting the jury in under 4 hours. Back home, the neighborhood changed. Porches filled with casseroles from folks John barely knew, a retired couple dropping off soup with a quiet, "Thank you." Kids' bikes littered lawns again, free of $250 penalties, and wind chimes rang like bells of hope. Caleb's classmates sent letters, "You're brave, we missed you," and a counselor offered free sessions, no strings attached. One night, flipping through that same album, he paused at a photo of Amber holding him as a newborn, a tiny smile breaking through. "Mom would have liked how you made things better," he told John, words that cracked months of silence like sunlight through storm clouds. At school, asked what he'd be when he grew up, Caleb said, "A lawyer, like the man who helped my dad, and like my dad who didn't let them win." Amber's legacy wasn't in her death, but in her son's quiet strength and a father's resolve. From a boy's tears came a neighborhood reborn, garden gnomes, laughter, and a hope that stretched beyond one family, proving even the smallest heart can carry a big fight. When the gavel fell in that Oak Ridge courtroom, it marked more than an end. It was a beginning. John Lewis had turned his grief over Amber's death and the HOA's $500 fine for his son Caleb's tears into a battering ram, toppling a corrupt system that fined folks for wind chimes and baby showers across their half-mile neighborhood. Carroll Mills got 18 months in jail. Her board faced bans and hefty penalties, some as high as $20,000, and the HOA dissolved, its $200,000 in dues frozen by court order. For us over 50, who've seen justice flicker in headlines or fade with time, this felt like a win from a bygone era. But John knew it wasn't the finish line. The trial didn't just punish, it exposed what happens when small abuses fester, when fear silences a street where kids once rode bikes, free of $250 tickets. So he kept going. From a dusty room above a bookstore, with a printer and a binder of his battle scars, he launched open-door defense. Word spread fast. Families from beyond Oak Ridge's 10-mile radius called, sharing tales of threats and fines, their voices echoing John's own. A retired paralegal pitched in, a journalist wrote it up, and within a year, John stood before the state legislature, wearing the same suit from Amber's funeral. His words, plain, true, spoke of power's cost. A boy afraid to cry, a neighborhood gagged by bylaws. 2 laws passed. One locked HOA wallets to audits. The other gave folks a fair shot against unfair fines. Small steps, but they mattered. Seeds planted from a father's fight. Back home, Caleb, now 10, grew sharper, asking about fairness and laws, not from fear, but from understanding. He told his class he'd be a lawyer, like my dad who didn't let them win. A quiet vow that hushed the room. Oak Ridge bloomed anew. Porches hosted coffee talks, not violation notices. Kids' laughter replaced the clack of typewritten threats. John didn't seek the spotlight, but it found him. Notes taped to his door read, "You saved us all." Justice wasn't a trophy to shelve. It was a spark, lighting a path from one family's stand to a broader fight. Amber's memory fueled it, Caleb's courage shaped it, and John's choice, to open a door, not close it, ensured it wouldn't fade, proving even a single voice can rewrite the rules for everyone. The story of John Lewis and his son Caleb carries lessons that hit home for those of us over 50. First, it reminds us that even in our darkest moments, like losing a spouse or facing petty tyrants like an overzealous HOA, there's power in standing up. John turned a $500 fine for Caleb's tears into a fight that freed a neighborhood, showing that resilience isn't just enduring, it's acting. Second, it's a call to look out for each other. When neighbors shared their stories, fines for wind chimes or bikes on the lawn, they became a force, proving community thrives when we break the silence. Third, justice isn't a finish line, it's a starting point. John's open door. Defense and new laws show small wins can ripple outward, a lesson for us to keep pushing, whether it's challenging a rule or helping a friend. Finally, it's about legacy. Caleb's dream to be a lawyer reflects how our battles shape the young. In our own lives, we can speak up, at town halls, in families, knowing our voices, seasoned by years, can plant hope for tomorrow. Even at our age, we're not done making a difference.